A 500,000 house sounds like a milestone, a badge of achievement, the kind of number people casually toss around as if it were still 2015, a time when real estate felt approachable and homeownership was within reach for many more households. But in 2026, that figure conceals a much harsher truth because the purchase price is only the surface layer of what it really takes to own a home. The reality that most buyers don't see or don't want to confront is the ongoing monthly cost, and that is where dreams quietly collapse for many aspiring homeowners. Very few people pay cash, and the vast majority rely on a mortgage, often stretched over 30 years, which can make what initially feels attainable suddenly feel like a decade's long financial burden. Even buyers with good credit now face historically high interest rates compared to the ultra low rates of the early 2010s, which many people still mentally reference when thinking about affordability. Rates hovering between 6.5% and 7% make borrowing money expensive once again, and that shifts the financial landscape dramatically. On top of that, there's the down payment, the first major hurdle. A conventional 20% down payment on a 500,000 home is 100,000 upfront, money that most households simply do not have sitting in a bank account. For the average family, accumulating that kind of liquid capital is a multi-year challenge, often requiring decades of saving and scrimping, and for many, it effectively eliminates them from the market entirely before they even start. But let's assume someone has managed to save that sum, which is already an impressive feat. That leaves a mortgage of 400,000, and at a 6.25% interest rate over 30 years, the principal and interest payment alone is roughly 2,600 a month, and that's before adding the many other recurring expenses that come with home ownership. Property taxes, typically around 1% to 1.5% of the home's value per year, tack on another 400 to 600 monthly, depending on the local tax rate. Then there's homeowners insurance, which varies widely but is often several $100s a month in many metro areas, plus potential HOA fees, maintenance, and inevitable repairs, which quietly push the real monthly cost past $3,200, and in some regions, closer to $3,500 or more. This is the number that truly defines affordability, not the headline sale price that sounds aspirational on paper. Banks and mortgage lenders do not care how stylish the kitchen is or how charming the curb appeal appears on Instagram. 6. They focus on the debt to income ratio, a strict measure that determines whether a household can realistically handle these payments. Most lenders prefer that total housing costs stay below 28% of a borrower's gross income, which is where the math becomes starkly revealing. To comfortably support a $3,500 monthly housing payment, a household needs a pre-tax monthly income of approximately $12,500 or an annual income of at least $150,000. That is the bare minimum for a safe approval and does not account for higher debt levels or more aggressive financial scenarios, meaning that anyone earning less may find themselves financially stretched to the breaking point. This is the moment when the illusion that a 500,000 home is middle class becomes painfully clear in today's market. It is a commitment that leans squarely into upper middle class territory. Yet culturally, and in the way real estate is discussed in media and casual conversation, it is still treated as a starter home, a threshold accessible to the average household. That mismatch between perception and reality is what causes so much frustration, confusion, and even resentment among potential buyers. The price of homes didn't just climb incrementally, it fundamentally altered the affordability equation. And most people simply didn't adjust their expectations quickly enough to match this new reality, leaving many feeling blindsided when the dream of owning a 500,000 home meets the stark arithmetic of monthly payments, interest, taxes, and insurance. What once seemed like a symbol of success now reads more like a cautionary tale, A financial mountain that demands not just a stable income, but disciplined savings, long-term planning, and a readiness to shoulder a cost far greater than the sticker price, exposing the uncomfortable truth that homeownership in 2026 is no longer just about reaching a number. It's about sustaining it month after month, year after year, in a market where the rules have shifted and affordability has quietly but drastically changed. Let's talk income, real income, the kind that actually pays the bills and survives the realities of life, not the optimistic pre-tax fantasies or wishful thinking so many buyers rely on when imagining home ownership. Because when people ask, who can afford a 500,000 house in 2026? The honest answer begins with a salary number that most households will never see, a figure that immediately separates aspirational dreams from financial reality. Across much of the country, the median household income is far below what's needed to comfortably support such a mortgage, and even dual income families often fall short when the numbers are calculated rigorously. Lenders don't simply glance at gross income, they examine existing financial obligations in meticulous detail. Student loans, car payments, credit card debt, childcare expenses, and other recurring obligations all reduce how much a household can safely borrow. Even a seemingly modest $500 monthly car payment can significantly lower the amount of house a buyer qualifies for. Now, imagine a household earning $150,000 annually. On paper, that sounds like a very solid income, a number that might feel luxurious to many. But once federal and state taxes are deducted alongside healthcare premiums, retirement contributions, payroll deductions, and other withholdings, take-home pay often drops closer to $8,500 per month. Then subtract the real monthly cost of owning a 500,000 house, roughly $3,500 when accounting for mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, and other essentials, and suddenly that household is left with 5,000 to cover everything else: groceries, transportation, utilities, insurance, savings, emergencies, and the general cost of living, including the occasional indulgence or unexpected expense. When you put it that way, a so-called high-income lifestyle begins to look far less luxurious and far more constrained, tight enough that a single unexpected event, a medical emergency, a car repair, or a sudden job disruption could throw the household into financial stress. And if income drops to $120,000 annually, the situation becomes even more precarious. Housing expenses alone could consume over 40% of take-home pay, a level most financial advisors consider dangerously high, turning what should be an asset into a potential liability. This is why, even in a market where home prices remain high, banks and mortgage lenders are approving fewer buyers. Affordability is not a matter of optimism or hope. It is a precise calculation of margins, and those margins have become razor thin. So who realistically qualifies for a 500,000 home in 2026? Typically, it's households with two strong earners, often both partners bringing in the 75,000 or more, or a single individual earning between 160,000 and 190,000 annually. These numbers are far from the average American salary. They correspond to higher skilled professions such as engineers, doctors, senior managers, successful entrepreneurs, or remote workers earning global salaries while living in lower cost regions. Even within this relatively privileged subset, many still feel stretched financially because the gap between the idealized starter home and practical affordability has widened so dramatically. The perception that a 500,000 house is normal or attainable for the average household is no longer aligned with reality, and when buyers run the numbers honestly, that illusion collapses entirely. Most people are not failing financially. They are being measured against a bar that has moved well beyond the average worker's reach, a bar dictated by rising interest rates, higher property taxes, insurance costs, and the structural realities of a housing market that is less forgiving than it once was. The market itself does not care how unfair or frustrating this feels. It is indifferent to cultural narratives about what constitutes a starter home or middle class achievement. It responds only to hard numbers: income, debt, interest rates, and risk, and these metrics now place many aspirational buyers on the outside looking in. What this means in practice is that even a household with a seemingly solid salary can be financially stressed simply by virtue of owning a 500,000 house. For the average worker, the reality is stark: affordability requires either a higher than average income, dual earners both making substantial salaries, or a willingness to compromise on other aspects of life. Even then, small disruptions, unexpected medical expenses, car repairs, or temporary unemployment can turn what was supposed to be an investment into a financial burden. The idea that a 500,000 home is within reach for most households is no longer accurate. It is a cautionary reminder that the housing market in 2026 is fundamentally different from what it was a decade ago, and navigating it successfully requires an honest assessment of income, expenses, and risk, rather than relying on outdated assumptions or aspirational thinking, because the numbers do not lie, and in this market, they are unforgiving. Income is only half the story when it comes to affording a 500,000 house, because the down payment is the true gatekeeper, the invisible barrier where inequality quietly determines who even gets a seat at the table. A 100,000 down payment is not something most people can casually save while renting in an expensive market, paying rising utility bills, healthcare premiums, student loans, and everyday living expenses, all while trying to maintain a life. For a significant portion of buyers in 2026, that sum does not come from earned income at all. It comes from family wealth, from gifts from parents, from inheritance, or from equity built in a previous home purchased years ago when prices were far lower. This is how the system filters buyers silently, without ever stating the rule out loud. Two households may earn identical salaries, have the same credit scores, and live in the same city, but the one with family assistance moves into home ownership while the other remains locked out of the market indefinitely. Even programs designed to lower the barrier, such as low down payment mortgages, are not a true equalizer. A buyer putting down just 5% instead of the conventional 20% sees the loan amount rise to 475,000, and that small reduction in upfront cost comes with its own hidden burdens. Monthly payments jump significantly, private mortgage insurance (PMI) is added, and the overall income required to qualify comfortably rises to around 170,000 per year. Unlike a down payment, PMI does not build equity. It is pure cost, flowing directly to the lender without contributing to the buyer's ownership stake. Meanwhile, the buyer fortunate enough to have 100,000 gifted from family avoids PMI entirely, secures a lower monthly payment, and enters the market on far more favorable terms. It is the same house, yet the financial reality for these two buyers is completely different, a stark example of how access, timing, and wealth background shape the homeownership equation more than discipline or income alone. The cumulative effect of this is profound. Homeownership is increasingly correlated with family background and prior advantages rather than effort or career success. Those who purchased earlier in life, perhaps a decade or more ago, benefited from rising home prices, building equity effortlessly as their homes appreciated. In contrast, today's first-time buyers face a literal wall of upfront capital requirements, and wages alone are rarely enough to surmount it. Compounding the problem, renting in 2026 does not offer a simple alternative. High rents consume the very income that could otherwise go towards saving for a down payment, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Renters struggle to accumulate savings, while existing homeowners continue to grow wealth through equity gains and appreciation. This feedback loop amplifies inequality, ensuring that wealthier families can pass advantage to the next generation while those without such backing fall further behind. The down payment is no longer simply a contribution toward a house. It is permission to participate in the housing market. And in 2026, that permission is granted to fewer people than ever, a silent but powerful determinant of who becomes a homeowner and who remains on the outside. The reality is that even a responsible, well-paid household can be excluded from homeownership purely due to the size of their bank account relative to the market's demands. Family support, inheritance, prior equity, or access to gifts now plays a decisive role, shaping not only who can buy a home, but who can realistically build wealth over time. For the majority of households without these advantages, the system effectively locks the door before they even reach the negotiation table, demonstrating that income, while important, is insufficient in isolation. The combination of high home prices, rising interest rates, and staggering down payment requirements creates a structural barrier that wages alone cannot breach, and it fundamentally alters the promise of the American dream or its equivalent in other markets. Homeownership, once seen as a pathway to wealth accumulation, is increasingly dependent on timing and inherited resources rather than individual effort or financial discipline. Those who do not have early access to family wealth are forced to watch, year after year, as appreciation and equity widen the gap, reinforcing an entrenched inequality that the market silently perpetuates. In essence, the down payment is not just a financial hurdle. It is a filter that determines opportunity, shaping the demographic and economic reality of homeownership in ways that are invisible to most, yet entirely decisive in 2026. From the bank's point of view, a 500,000 house is not a dream. It is a calculated risk, a carefully measured set of probabilities and worst-case scenarios, and the bank's primary question is never, can you afford this today? But rather, can you survive this if everything goes wrong? That perspective fundamentally shifts how the mortgage process feels to potential buyers, because lenders are focused less on aspirational numbers and more on financial resilience, stability, and predictability. This is why credit scores are so heavily weighted in underwriting. A high score signals not just reliability, but a proven pattern of discipline and fiscal responsibility, evidence that a borrower is likely to meet obligations even under stress. But even an excellent credit score cannot compensate for weak income, high levels of debt, or overly complicated financial obligations. In 2026, many high earners still encounter rejections because their financial lives are over-leveraged, burdened by multiple car loans, inflated lifestyles, credit card balances, and other recurring monthly commitments. Banks read these obligations as cracks in the borrower's financial foundation, vulnerabilities that could convert a dream home into a nightmare if circumstances shift unexpectedly. Underwriting standards today remain tighter than they were in the pre-2008 era, particularly for large loans of $400,000 and above, and this is especially true for self-employed individuals, contractors, or anyone with variable income streams. Commission-based pay, seasonal work, freelance contracts, or other irregular earnings increase the perceived risk dramatically. In many cases, lenders discount such income by 20% or more when calculating how much a borrower can safely afford, a reality that surprises many people who consider themselves financially secure or successful, but do not fit neatly into the bank's standardized model. The result is that the ideal borrower is no longer just someone with a steady income. The perfect candidate is a W-2 employee with a long, uninterrupted employment history, low debt levels, a high credit score, and the ability to make a significant down payment. This set of criteria describes only a narrow slice of the population, leaving many well-intentioned, responsible potential buyers on the outside, unable to meet the invisible checklist that banks use to measure risk, and that is before life factors are considered. Children, healthcare expenses, elder care responsibilities, or financial support for extended family members, all of which can further complicate a household's ability to demonstrate affordability, yet are largely invisible to lenders. The bank does not factor in personal values, family obligations, or long-term goals. It only sees ratios, percentages, and stress tests. Affordability, in practice, is therefore much colder, stricter, and less forgiving than most buyers expect, and the disconnect between perception and reality is a major source of frustration. Many households in 2026 discover this the hard way when pre-approval letters arrive, often lower than anticipated, leaving buyers shocked or demoralized because the numbers do not align with their personal sense of financial capability. The truth is that the bank's model is built on survivability, not aspiration. A household could earn a high income, save diligently, and appear financially savvy, yet still be denied a mortgage or approved for far less than imagined if their income is not consistent or their obligations are deemed risky. This creates a landscape in which a 500,000 home is not accessible to the average responsible worker, and the notion of a starter home for most middle-class families becomes increasingly elusive. Buyers may feel confused, even disillusioned, but the reality is simple: the numbers do not lie, expectations do. The ideal borrower exists, but that ideal is narrower than the cultural narrative suggests, and the standards banks apply are designed to withstand worst-case scenarios, not reward aspiration. Mortgages in 2026 are therefore as much about risk mitigation as they are about access to capital. The bank's viewpoint is a reminder that the dream of home ownership, while desirable, is mediated by systems built to protect lenders first, leaving affordability, accessibility, and opportunity contingent on a precise alignment of income stability, debt management, credit history, and upfront capital, a combination that the majority of prospective buyers cannot fully achieve. This reality explains why so many potential homeowners encounter obstacles despite good income, careful budgeting, and strong intentions. The requirements are deliberately conservative, and the house is treated as a liability in the event of disruption rather than a mere asset to be acquired. Understanding this perspective is crucial for anyone navigating the 2026 housing market because it reframes the conversation from "can I afford it?" to "can I survive the worst case scenario while owning it?" And that shift changes everything about what is considered realistically attainable, highlighting the harsh truth that banks, not aspirations, set the limits in today's home buying landscape. So who really buys a 500,000 house in 2026? The answer is not everyone, and it is certainly not most families. It is a highly specific and narrow slice of the population defined not by ambition or desire, but by financial positioning, timing, and access to resources that allow them to comfortably shoulder both the upfront and ongoing costs of home ownership in a high-price market. These are typically dual-income households with either no children or perhaps just one, professional careers that command above-average salaries, and a lifestyle that allows them to save aggressively while avoiding crushing debt obligations. Think of tech workers in software and IT roles, healthcare professionals like doctors, nurses, and specialists, engineers across industries, and finance professionals in positions that combine high income with stable employment histories. Many of these buyers delayed purchasing a home well into their 30s or even 40s, strategically waiting until their earnings reached peak levels, allowing them to amass savings for a substantial down payment and create the financial buffers necessary to withstand unexpected costs or temporary income disruption. Investors also appear in this group, pooling capital or leveraging multiple streams of income to acquire property as part of a broader portfolio strategy. Buyers relocating from more expensive metropolitan areas often enter this market with equity already in hand, using the proceeds from previous real estate sales in high-cost regions to give themselves a competitive advantage in markets where the nominal price may seem approachable, but the true affordability is still high. Similarly, families with intergenerational support, whether in the form of direct financial gifts, inheritance, or co-signed loans, have a structural advantage that enables them to bypass the most restrictive barriers that keep the majority of potential buyers out of the market. These buyers are not reckless, and they are not privileged by chance alone. They are positioned, both financially and strategically, to navigate the realities of a high-interest, high-cost housing environment. They have the buffers needed to absorb rate hikes without immediate distress, to handle unexpected repairs without sacrificing other essentials, and to weather temporary dips in income without jeopardizing the mortgage. For them, purchasing a 500,000 home remains a significant commitment, but it is manageable, aligned with their income and long-term wealth strategy, and does not immediately render them house poor or financially vulnerable. Everyone else, by contrast, is forced to make compromises, often in ways that materially affect quality of life and long-term financial stability. Households that cannot meet the requirements for this level of purchase may settle for smaller homes, accept longer commutes, or choose condominiums instead of standalone houses, effectively trading space and convenience for affordability. Many are priced out entirely, watching the market from the sidelines, unable to compete with those who arrive with capital, timing, or family support already in place. This is not a reflection of personal failure, lack of effort, or poor decision making. It is a matter of math, structure, and systemic economic realities. Pretending otherwise only deepens frustration and confusion among buyers who feel unfairly excluded, while misunderstanding the underlying dynamics perpetuates misconceptions about what constitutes a starter home or a reasonable target for the average household. The market is not broken. It is functioning precisely as it was designed to, reflecting patterns of income, access to capital, and risk management that have always dictated who can buy and who cannot. Understanding this truth does not make the reality fair, and it certainly does not erase the structural barriers that prevent many households from entering home ownership, but it does provide clarity, revealing that affordability is not simply a question of desire or aspiration, but of financial positioning, timing, and preparedness. Recognizing which buyers the market is built to serve also reframes the conversation around homeownership in 2026. It is not a universal milestone, a symbolic achievement, or an attainable goal for most middle-class families at typical income levels. Instead, it is an investment that only a subset of households can pursue without significant compromise or financial risk, a reality shaped by professional choice, income trajectory, family support, prior equity accumulation, and strategic planning. The 500,000 home, therefore, is less a cultural benchmark of success and more a reflection of financial alignment and market positioning, a price point that signals both opportunity for the well-prepared and exclusion for those who arrive without the structural advantages necessary to compete effectively. In short, the narrative that a 500,000 house is as attainable for the average household collapses when examined through the lens of real incomes, debt obligations, down payment requirements, and risk tolerance, leaving a clear but uncomfortable truth. Homeownership at this level in 2026 is designed for a very particular group of people, and for everyone else, the market demands compromise, patience, and the recognition that opportunity is contingent on preparation, timing, and access rather than mere aspiration. Here's the uncomfortable conclusion: in 2026, a 500,000 house is no longer the symbolic middle class benchmark it once was. It has become, in practical terms, a wealth tested asset, a financial threshold that only those with sufficient income, savings, or access to capital can cross without risking long term financial strain. The numbers don't lie, even if cultural narratives and wishful thinking try to convince us otherwise. Affordability is no longer about aspiration or desire, it is about structure, timing, and the alignment of multiple financial factors that operate independently of emotion. Income, interest rates, debt obligations, credit scores, and upfront capital requirements combine to determine whether a household can realistically purchase a home without jeopardizing stability, and these factors often settle the question long before considerations of personal taste, lifestyle, or neighborhood preference even enter the conversation. For many households, the math is sobering: the monthly payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance obligations on a $500 house, when combined with existing debts and living expenses, place this level of ownership far beyond the reach of average earners, leaving them to either compromise on location, size, or quality, or to step out of the market entirely. Yet clarity in understanding these realities is not a limitation. It is a form of power. By recognizing how the system functions, buyers can make smarter, more intentional financial choices that align with their actual circumstances rather than aspirational ideals. For some, this may mean renting for a longer period while building savings and investments elsewhere, taking advantage of lower risk opportunities to grow wealth without the immediate pressures of homeownership. For others, it may mean relocating to more affordable regions where housing costs are better matched to local incomes, or prioritizing mobility and flexibility over the cultural expectation of buying a house in a particular market. It may also mean redefining success entirely, decoupling social expectations from personal financial reality, and finding stability and growth through alternative pathways. Homeownership is not the only route to financial security or wealth accumulation, and the assumption that a 500,000 house is normal or an attainable milestone for the average household creates a cycle of frustration, disappointment, and misaligned expectations. The real winners in 2026 are not those who stretch their finances to the breaking point, taking on mortgages that consume the majority of their income or leave them vulnerable to economic shocks. The real winners are those who understand the structure of the market, the constraints and opportunities it presents, and who approach the system with intention, preparation, and strategy rather than hope. These are the households that factor in not just current income, but potential future risks, interest rate fluctuations, emergency expenses, and the long-term sustainability of their mortgage. They recognize that preparation involves both capital accumulation and risk mitigation, from building a substantial down payment to maintaining emergency savings, keeping debt low, and strategically timing a purchase in a way that aligns with both life stage and career trajectory. In short, the market does not reward optimism, determination, or effort alone. It rewards preparation, knowledge, and the ability to play within its rules. Understanding this truth is uncomfortable because it confronts widely held cultural narratives about what home ownership means and who can realistically achieve it. But it is also liberating because it allows households to approach their financial futures with intention rather than reaction, to align their goals with reality rather than aspiration, and to avoid the stress, compromise, and disappointment that comes from misjudging affordability. The 2026 housing market is unforgiving to those who ignore the math, yet it is navigable for those who respect it. And in that respect lies the key to long-term financial stability and strategic wealth building. In other words, a 500 Zalozen house is no longer a simple milestone. It is a measured challenge that tests preparedness, foresight, and alignment with systemic realities, and households that succeed are those who approach it strategically rather than emotionally. The lesson is clear: hope and aspiration alone are insufficient. Understanding income requirements, debt limitations, interest rates, capital access, and risk factors is essential, and using that knowledge to make deliberate, informed decisions is what separates those who merely dream from those who thrive. In the end, the housing market in 2026 does not reward wishful thinking. It rewards preparation, strategic thinking, and the ability to navigate a complex, unforgiving system with clarity, patience, and foresight. And households that internalize this reality are the ones who emerge not just as homeowners, but as financially resilient, empowered, and strategically positioned participants in a market that is as demanding as it is revealing.